Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Compliance Week webcast. I'm Joe McCafferty, Executive Editor of Compliance Week, and I'll be hosting today's session. This afternoon, or this morning, depending on where you're coming to us in the world, we're going to be talking about ways to eliminate e-discovery waste. Before we hear from our guests, let me quickly go over the agenda for this afternoon. We're scheduled to go for 1 hour. I'll give a brief introduction, and then we'll jump into the presentation, brought to you today along with Bluesource. The presentation will be followed by a question and answer session. You can ask your questions at any time by using the Ask a Question function that's on the left-hand side of your screen. I'll pose the questions to our guests at the end of the presentation, but I encourage you to ask your questions as they occur to you. This webcast will also offer CPE credits. To obtain your CPE credits, wait until the webcast is over and I sign off. At that point, a final exam will be presented automatically in a separate window. If you have any trouble viewing that test or getting your CPE certificate, send us an email at info@complianceweek.com to request a copy. A few other administrative details. Anytime during the presentation, you can download the slides. This is an important one. We usually hear that people want to download those slides. You can do that from the drop-down menu that's on the left-hand side of your screen. You can also hit the View Slide Full Screen button if you wish to increase the size of the slides. Lastly, a Help button is located in the upper right-hand corner for your assistance. Today's webcast is a part of a series that Compliance Week launched a few years ago. We hold them just about every week, usually on Thursdays. Our guests have been Chief Compliance and Governance Officers at leading public companies and experts on various compliance, regulatory, governance, and risk topics. For an upcoming schedule of all our webcasts, you can find them on our website, complianceweek.com, for details or to register for any of those. So please do check that out. I also want to let you know that we have an updated website coming that we're very excited about. So we encourage you in the coming days to check out our new website at complianceweek.com. Enough of the advertisement. Let's begin our program. We are very happy to have with us Matthew Edwards. Matthew is President of Bluesource North America and Global CTO for Bluesource Worldwide. With Bluesource, he became the first non-vendor consultant in the world accredited for KVS Enterprise Vault, now Symantec, of course. He helped pioneer the archive migration industry, creating one of the world's best-selling archive migration products. Matthew also created novel managed services that have allowed business enterprises to bypass traditional legal service providers when tackling their e-discovery requirements. A few personal notes here. Matthew is a native of England. He now lives in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area. And since we're all soccer fans now after the World Cup, we're going to note that he supports the Arsenal Football Club. Without further ado, Matthew, do you want to get us started?
Thank you very much, Joe. I appreciate that. Well, good morning, good afternoon. Hopefully nothing that appeared on the previous slide has prejudiced you in any way against this presentation. Yes, I'm British and I support Arsenal. Hopefully that's not going to create a problem. Nor should it create a problem that I'm currently consider myself Texan either. But I know in some parts of the United States that can also be somewhat of a contentious point. But thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully you'll benefit from the information that we've assembled here today for you. E-discovery is a huge subject. It's a subject that's evolving, and since it would in such a short time be impossible to cover the whole subject in any great detail, we're just going today to look at a small slice of the overall pie. My hope is that by focusing on 4 areas of e-discovery waste, and also the role of managed services in creating better efficiencies, you're going to be provided with some fresh insights into bettering your own e-discovery activities. So now it's my first opportunity to use the technology and advance the slide. Here we go. So I'm not going to reread all my bio and bore you with that, but I did just want to tell you a few things about myself. I should really start by telling you what I'm not. I'm not a lawyer, nor really do I consider myself a true e-discovery expert. My expertise is in running a company that employs some very, very smart people, far smarter than I could ever be, who have created professional services, support and managed services that really center around archiving and e-discovery. And for that reason, I'm going to hope to present much of today's presentation in layman's terms that all should be able to follow regardless of your experience. I'm happy to take questions at the end of the presentation today, and if you require a true e-discovery expert or a true attorney to respond to you, then I'd also be happy to get someone to follow up with you if you allow us permission to contact you after the presentation today. Information governance, compliance, e-discovery, and archiving, these are really the things that I've been very much involved with over the past 14 years or so as part of Bluesource, both here in the US and, as you can tell from my accent, also from London in England. Speaking of which, let me just give you a brief overview of Bluesource's background. We are a company that was established in the year 2000, not long after the millennium bug surprised us all with how little it did to turn our worlds upside down. And sadly, not long before the events a year later on 9/11 really did turn our world upside down. Today's sad news, of course, of the Malaysian aircraft being shot down over the Ukraine really bring to mind in a terrible way those sad events. And it was actually that very first event, the destruction of the Twin Towers, no less than a couple of months after 9/11, that led me to my first big e-discovery project back there with Bluesource. You may or may not know the story, but the landlord of the World Trade Center and the insurance underwriters, mostly of whom are in the Lloyd's of London market, got into some litigation with regards to who is on the hook to pay for what. It got pretty ugly, and to be honest, an ugly thing to be involved with, considering the unspeakable grief that was still being felt by the families of those who lost their lives in 9/11. Nonetheless, it was the first time I'd used an email archiving product in anger to search for keywords, date ranges, and custodians. From there, the company grew to start taking on other consulting work, and we grew from a small consultancy in London to a company now that has offices in London, England, Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, Sofia, Bulgaria, and more recently we've just opened up offices in Sydney, Australia as well. Here are just a few stats about our company. In the last 12 months globally, we've run 290 information management and e-discovery projects. We have technology expertise in the Microsoft stack, but also predominantly for this call in the Symantec space. So that would include Enterprise Vault, Clearwell, Discovery Accelerator, Compliance Accelerator, and Actions. Our managed services globally achieve a 98% SLA, and those SLAs are time to respond, but also time to fix SLAs. And finally, with regards to this presentation today, we are a Symantec master specialist in archiving and e-discovery solutions. Now, before we go on to discuss the 4 signs of e-discovery waste, I'd like to share some snippets with you from a recent survey that was carried out in conjunction with Bluesource by Osterman Research. I hope you'll find these useful in helping you to benchmark your own e-discovery readiness and experience. And then we're going to actually discuss the main topic of today's presentation and look at the benefits and risks of managed services with regards to e-discovery. But before we review the results of Osterman's research survey, let's just remind ourselves of why e-discovery has become more and more challenging over recent years. In December 2006, the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure in the US, the FRCP, which obviously provides a legal framework to civil courts, it was amended. And in the amendment, the FRCP documented 2 very, very important points. Firstly, that electronic data is discoverable. And secondly, that the duty to begin preserving potentially relevant information starts when litigation can be reasonably anticipated. Now, these changes to the FRCP reflect the views of the committees that respond to the Supreme Court, that companies have, in their opinion, a much higher level of control of their electronic information than previously expected. And therein really lies the challenge, the difference between the expectation and realities, because, of course, new technologies that create and store ESI, or electronic stored information, are in many cases being outpaced, or rather they're outpacing the e-discovery technology that can search, store, and preserve them. It's a bit like mole whacking. As soon as another mole comes up and pokes its head through, it's another tool that's needed to whack it. Now, the ability to respond to an anticipated or to an actual lawsuit with a complete data collection and a fast and inclusive legal hold and a detailed document review and expected time frame really can mean the difference between winning or losing a lawsuit. So are you ready today to respond to an e-discovery request? Let's see how your peers responded here in the survey results. First of all, the sample population of the survey that was carried out consisted more than 100 business leaders in organizations with at least 500 or more employees. In fact, the average number of employees was 28,000. So that gives you an idea of the size of some of the companies that were responded to the survey. And the median for the survey was 5,000. So we had a good mix of respondents in terms of size. The participants represented here in the pie chart show you from which industries those come from. And not surprisingly, many of those participants were from regulated industries. So let's just look at the headlights, as it were, of the survey. 50% of organizations that responded to our survey believe that their e-discovery capabilities are lacking. And only 13% believe that their capabilities are, in their own words, very, very complete. So that just goes to show how the vast majority of those who sampled in our research, which we hope are representative of the industry as a whole, are very uncomfortable with the level of ability that they have to be ready for e-discovery. What was interesting as well from our point of view was that social media was highlighted as one of the particular risks to e-discovery readiness. Only 29% of the firms that were surveyed indicated that if they had to impose a litigation hold on social media content, that they could do so with confidence that all the content would be held as long as necessary. And then finally, if we actually look at the readiness or whether the preparedness of each of the technologies in relation to one another, it would appear that by and large those who believe that they have better readiness really is around the email side of the house. Not surprisingly, as we go further up the chart here, you can see that those who feel that they're prepared for social media and also for the mobile devices, the bring your own devices, are, by comparison, far less prepared, it would seem, than those who have already adopted good email archiving and email discovery platforms within their organizations. So Osterman really found that the completeness of e-discovery varies, but by and large is not surprisingly lacking. To recap, 50% of those surveyed felt that their e-discovery capability was lacking. Only 13% were very confident that their approach was complete. Social media, cloud, and bring your own devices are particularly concerning, email less so. So I'll ask you all a rhetorical question. How does your organization fit in with this? Is it well positioned in comparison with the peers that we surveyed in this result? We'd certainly love to hear your experiences at some point, maybe following today's presentation. Now let's move on to the main topic for today. E-discovery waste, 4 signs it's time to reconsider your e-discovery environment. Now the first 3 wastes that we're going to look at are more obvious than the 4th. So let's begin though with the first waste. The first waste that we have is time wasting. Looking at our first bullet there, failing to target collections effectively is possibly one of the largest wastes of e-discovery time. Since early case assessment counts for perhaps 50 to 70% of e-discovery costs, it's important that the data targeted for collection is as relevant as it possibly can be. In reality, courts typically do not require parties to collect every shred of ESI as part of their e-discovery process. And organizations that are still wedded to the thought that they have to keep every shred of documentation really are wasting significant amounts of time and money. If collecting everything is not required, then really why should organizations waste that time and money following maybe an outdated and unnecessary approach? Needlessly over-collecting data, of course, it's a funnel. You put more in at one end and it means that more comes out the other end. It really could result in unnecessary downstream costs in the form of increased document processing, attorney review time and costs, and of course vendor hosting fees, because more ESI is collected than necessary. A simple rule of thumb really is that the more that's collected at the beginning of the matter, then the higher the downstream discovery cost is going to be. And that means casting a narrow collection net at the beginning of the case rather than over-collecting can really save significant time and money. In the past, it was common for IT departments to receive requests for restores of entire backups of servers or disk images from workstations and PCs throughout the organization. Now, maybe this was okay when servers had 500 megabyte hard drives back in the day, but today backups run into the multiple gigabytes or terabytes, and this type of request really only serves to create disruption and wasted effort. Now, you're most likely aware and perhaps using some of these, but there are a number of collection tools on the market today that can enable the targeted collection of ESI from multiple data sources in an automated manner through an organization's computer network. Well, each of these is designed to limit the scope and size of the collection. For example, a targeted collection could be limited to include particular custodians, certain file types or documents that result from a keyword or date range search and so forth. But herein lies part of the problem. The ESI collection tools really are as dumb as the people who operate them. They're not going to be a magic bullet. They're not going to enable to do your targeting more effectively than you could program it to do. In other words, they really depend very much on having a very effective and narrow list of keyword searches that have been carefully crafted and tested with respect to the issues, claims, and the defenses in a case. It's important that if you're going to use an ESI tool to target collections effectively, that you assemble a collection team internally to your organization and collaborate with outside counsel if you have outside counsel. The teams themselves really need to decide what the collection plan that the ESI tool is going to deliver will be. Your internal collection team should really include the discovery point person, preferably an attorney, and IT personnel, obviously, as well. Outside counsel's team should also include a supervising attorney, a project manager, and maybe a vendor if you're going to use a vendor. Now, this may seem like a lot of cooks to spoil the broth, but the more the target, the more that the initial collection is targeted, and the fewer times you then need to retarget your collection, then clearly that's going to be better downstream. And this streamlined approach is likely to save your organization time and money without sacrificing legal defensibility or even forensic soundness. Our second bullet point, failing to have and follow a repeatable process. Now, related to the first bullet point, another time waster is failing to have and follow a repeatable process. How so? Well, simply put, each time litigation strikes, the organization that does not learn from the previous case repeats the same mistakes and spends too much time collecting information on systems, perhaps information about which systems to place legal holds on, that really it should have already had from the first time around. Now, some might argue that no two litigations or legal matters are the same, and to some degree that is true. Different cases have different complexities. However, there are reoccurring themes and patterns in many discovery exercises. So rather than make the same mistake twice, write it down, put the lessons learned down, what lives where, who has ownership, how can legal holds be placed or released, etc. These things. The collection team is going to be far more efficient if they have that down in a process, albeit a living, breathing document that they can follow. So make sure your company has an e-discovery process document, and if not, invest a little time to save a lot of time in the future. So that's our first waste. The second waste we're going to look at is resources, and the first of which is failing to have an ongoing, routine, and defensible data deletion process. Now, in the same way that having an e-discovery process can save time, so too can having an ongoing, routine, defensible data deletion process. And that can save time in terms of resources for humans and also technical resources. Year after year, companies accumulate more and more electronic data, which in turn can really drive up discovery costs. There's very few organizations that have implemented ongoing, routine and defensible data deletion processes as a regular business process. Our experience here in the US, Europe, Asia and all over the world is that companies have a lot of electronic junk. Older emails, files with no or expired retention requirements, files with very, very little business value are clogging up the arteries. So if done intelligently, this older information, information that is of no use anymore, can be deleted without incurring the wrath of the employees. Now remember, your organization, even if it's a highly regulated organization, is under no legal obligation to keep every piece of information generated or ever received. All companies can and should delete data ongoing, on a routine basis. Now, is that easier said than done? Maybe. But the challenge really isn't entirely a technical one. In fact, it's more of a mindset problem. You know, human beings, we are naturally hoarders. You can see it in the proliferation of the self-storage companies in the physical world. We just don't like throwing things away, and we think, well, that could be useful one day. I better keep it, just not in my garage anymore. And really, compliance officers and legal departments are frequently some of the worst offenders in this regard, because it's easier sometimes to keep everything and destroy nothing. The problem, of course, down the line is that keeping things for too long, especially if they're no longer required, such as personal health information or personal credit information, these things can be just as risky as deleting them too soon. So consequently, the regular systematic deletion of expired or valueless information, if of course there's no legal or regulatory obligation present to keep it, that really should be a regular process in any information management program. But how can data be deleted in a legally defensible manner? To be a defensible process, it's quite straightforward. An organization must be able to demonstrate that it has firstly followed a good faith effort to find and protect any content that is subject to regulatory and legal retention rules. Any data that falls outside of that bracket is therefore a candidate for deletion. But secondly, before it can be deleted, the organization needs to show that by using reasonable and reliable policies, procedures, processes and technology, that data is indeed worthy of deletion. And then thirdly, before hitting the kill switch, an organization will need to ensure that it has a lack of duty to preserve that deleted data at the time that it was disposed. So this is obviously an area which very few companies do well in, but tested and documented defensible disposal processes of data can really save valuable human time and technology resources. Now, our next bullet there is having the right archive or early case assessment tools and not having too many of them. There's an old saying that the bad workman blames his tools. But so many tools on the market today to archive, preserve and cull down potentially responsive data that there's a real risk of creating an overly complex e-discovery environment and, of course, creating plenty of bad workmen. Each tool that's used requires human resources to learn it, to maintain it, and to deploy effectively. Too many tools could also mean that there's gaps between the ESI collection and assessment, and that could also create potential risk. Now, it is true that there isn't a one-size-fits-all product out there that can handle the whole EDRM process 100% end-to-end, but many of the legal products do 90% of it, and they do it quite well. In fact, 90% of something useful is better than 100% of something unintelligible. So the advice that we have really is to spend time researching the market and ask your peers and other organizations what they're using. If there's a user group for the tool, then join it. A good tool that you can master will certainly save you time and effort. And if you're supplying reports to council, make sure that they are part of the procurement decision as well, of course, for archiving and ECA tools. Just believe it or not, you'll sleep a lot sounder at night if the attorneys made the joint decision with you, trust me. One recent development that also speeds up document review is predictive coding. And that's probably outside of the scope for much of what we're going to talk about today, but predictive coding certainly is designed in the right direction to provide a faster way to separate potentially responsive from non-responsive documents by applying an algorithmic review decision really based upon a subset of the documents across a larger set. In other words, sampling what you have and making reasonable assumptions. But as I said, it's really outside of today's review, but certainly predictive coding is another capability in the ECA tools that's making a big difference. Our final bullet under this slide is overly broad preservation of data. Now, we've already mentioned that too often the instinct of an organization is typically to preserve everything, which leads to more data going into the top of the funnel. But really, law firms and vendors will sometimes argue collecting everything is more defensible, but really it's arguably not true, because for the law firm and the vendor, it's going to be more lucrative the more data they have to process. But in addition to a defensible data deletion policy in target collections, we should also include the overly broad use of legal holds, which happens today. Now, of course, one of the most important litigation preparedness requirements is that all potential parties to an actual or anticipated lawsuit find and quickly secure all the potentially relevant content with a secure legal hold. Now, for those of you familiar with it, that really helps to limit the risk of spoliation or evidence destruction and make sure it doesn't occur. In many situations, older archive solutions that have been used for years that perhaps were designed for storage management do not really allow for granular content search and legal hold. And what often that means is it requires the entire archive or mailbox or folder to be put on hold until discovery phase has passed. Now, this, of course, isn't desirable either, because a small percentage of the archive may be responsive to a specific lawsuit, but the hold goes on everything, and quite often it doesn't come off again. Now, if this is happening in your organization, you should maybe try considering migrating your archives to a system that allows more granular and targeted approach to legal hold. But certainly, regardless of that, there should be a routine legal hold review and process to remove legal hold as soon as it is no longer required. Another overkill comes from the belief that making a forensic copy or mirror image of every custodian's hard drive that may be relevant to a particular matter is required to avoid spoliation. But for many civil cases, or in fact most civil cases, this really isn't required. Looking at the FRCP Rule 34 and case notes of it help us to appreciate some clarity on that, because it states that courts should use, or should rather guard against undue intrusiveness resulting from inspecting or testing such systems. So really, we have to be very considerate. There are certain areas of fraud and criminal activity that might require forensic imaging of everything. But if it's not required, ask yourself, do I need to do it? There's also a growing trend for something which is becoming known as proportionality, or in other words, the amount of data that we have to preserve and the burden on the defendant to produce it should be proportional to what is at issue within the case. Now, over the past several years, several jurisdictions and courts have established rules that in absence of agreement of counsel or in absence of showing of a good cause, that the amount of e-discovery that should be done, it should be limited in a proportional way. Now, these changes have actually been proposed for the future amendments of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure 26. And that would require courts to consider proportionality when dealing with discovery issues. Now, that amendment could start as early as next year. Again, work with counsel to figure out what the burden of preservation of data is in a matter, and then look for a reasonable approach to limit unnecessary preservation of data. Let's look at our third waste. Probably figured this one out already from the first two. The third one is money. Now, what are some of the common wastes of money? The first one I put down is failure to track spending on e-discovery. Now, even large organizations with very disciplined supply chain controls, they often fail to track and control spending on e-discovery. Many e-discovery costs are buried within individual matters. And, of course, little effort is made to identify the total e-discovery cost separately from the overall litigation spend, or to use total spend to negotiate better rates with LSPs, with legal service providers. True, when you get a bill from a lawyer, the lawyer doesn't necessarily have the same budget restrictions as IT, but the idea of spending whatever it takes to get the job done isn't really a sound idea either. Tracking spending on e-discovery can be, in many cases, just as much an art as it is a science. The first real difficulty to tracking spending is that costs aren't often recorded in a way that makes extracting any real data very easy. Law firms send a bill, and the bill will have hours and itemized costs, and that's just about it. Vendor invoices to the law firms are probably even less detailed. So reviewing the costs involved is messy. It takes time and it takes energy, because allowing you to track e-discovery costs really wasn't the goal of the attorney writing his time charges on the bill. So what can be done to track spending in a better way? Well, firstly, a good project manager that understands legal process should be able to track spending by not necessarily looking at the bills that are coming in as the final word, but actually looking at the underlying activities and comparing it to the industry norms or prior case experience. For example, if you know that the average per custodian cost for ESI of a particular matter is X, then it should be possible to build a spreadsheet, the budget for each activity, and multiply that up, and then cross-compare that estimate with the outcome. If they're too wildly different, then ask for a more detailed breakdown of the billing and negotiate or complain. If they're close enough, then tick the box and move on. From my experience is that attorneys are notorious for billing late after things have built up and accrued. So you really do need to have someone keeping them in check, so to speak. Also, there are obviously common billing codes now used by legal providers. For example, the Uniform Task-Based Management System is one of those that provides the codes to make it a little bit better to track costs. But at the very minimum, you should really know what the average cost per custodian or the average cost per hosting X gigabytes with the provider, or the average amount of data collected per custodian is. You should have those metrics to hand, and then you should be able to model it in a spreadsheet or a dedicated tracking tool. And that will really allow you to much better anticipate costs. And it'll also show you if there's any costs that are going adrift of the plan or the budget. Our next waste of money is completely handing over the reins to an outside law firm. Now, it's fair to say that an organization's and an outside law firm's interests are not always aligned. Outside counsel is often concerned with billing, quality, billing, defensibility, and billing. And you probably get the point. They're in the business to do all those things, billing 3 times as much. So when it comes to keeping e-discovery costs low by increasing the efficiency, not repeating reviews of ESI that isn't relevant, and so on, these are things that may be of interest to you, but they aren't necessarily the number one priority of the outside law firm. Handing over the entire e-discovery process really does not necessarily reduce risks, but it certainly will invite waste, especially if the case is complex or the amount of time before the deposition is short. Things could get hurried. Sure, once again, the mantra of we'll throw whatever it takes at it to get it done may be the modus operandi for your company, but really without someone internally owning, guiding and driving the case, these costs can rise exponentially. They can rise very, very quickly. One point to note is that even if an organization depends on its outside counsel to manage the entire process, the courts actually still hold your inside counsel responsible for the process. A better approach, if you have to outsource most of your ECA and document review and production, is perhaps to supplement your in-house counsel so that they can continue to own and drive the strategy. So those are the first three wastes, probably the most obvious: time, resources, and money. The final one is probably less so. I describe this one as a waste of opportunity. Now, this last bracket really has more to do with opportunities that may be open to you now, or at least early on in the discovery process. Of course, learning from prior error is one way to avoid repeating the same mistakes. Documenting lessons learned for future e-discovery tasks has already been mentioned, but there are three things that can make a huge difference to the time, resource and money that your organization currently spends on e-discovery. The first opportunity waste: working with inside counsel and opponents to limit the scope of e-discovery. Now, when a subpoena or deposition motion lands on your doorstep, the first step for you really has to be a meeting of minds internally to figure out what can be done to limit the scope of the e-discovery request. The first request from a plaintiff or from an opponent is always overly broad. Inside counsel and opponents will normally be encouraged by the courts in any case to meet and confer to agree a reasonable scope before e-discovery takes place. But it's really your role within the organization to ensure that that's done and that the key words or other limiting factors to the discovery are understood and communicated and agreed upon before that meet and confer actually takes place. In fact, failing to negotiate on keywords and other limiting factors is really a big opportunity wasted. Sometimes during the reactive firefight of litigation, companies fail to negotiate keywords with their opponent, and this really is a big no-no. Do not just take what is given to you by your opponent. How could you realistically make a judgment, though, of what is and isn't acceptable, the scope of an e-discovery case? Well, firstly, an internal meeting of minds, inside counsel, IT, stakeholders, and so forth should take place so that the burden of production of those things could be better understood by all. And then make realistic judgments as to the type and the amount of e-discovery that is truly needed for that specific deposition. Inside counsel should then meet and confer with the opposing counsel and discuss mutually agreeable means to control e-discovery costs. It is critical that counsel comes to those meetings prepared with concrete measures, such as a phased discovery, maybe limits on custodians or search terms, and what's becoming more frequent now are clawback agreements. Because of the automated nature of e-discovery processing, maybe something that is privileged is inadvertently disclosed during the process. So clawback agreements up front, before e-discovery even takes place, are very important so that they can form part of a concrete plan. And finally, if all else fails and the opposing side is demanding an unreasonable discovery, counsel should be prepared to provide the court with concrete evidence, including hard estimates of costs, showing that the discovery demanded by the opposing side is disproportionate and that costs should be shifted. Okay, our next waste of opportunity is hiring an outside vendor, if you have to, too late in the process. It's said that a great white shark can smell a single drop of blood in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and they can detect blood from up to a mile away in the sea. Well, interestingly, many outside e-discovery vendors have the same acute sense when it comes to smelling panic. Some even have two pricing sheets, one set of lower prices for the companies that are not in a rush, and the second set of higher prices for companies who are in a rush and need to find a provider immediately. If you're going to get outside help, make sure that the decision is taken early so that the vendor can be part of the early planning process and the organization can get the benefit of competitive pricing. Alternatively, develop your in-house ECA practice so that you're less reliant upon outside help, or use an outside vendor that will work with your in-house practice on a retainer basis with rates that are agreed in advance. Our third bullet, opportunity waste, not having an effective policy for social media and bring your own devices. Now, under the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, Rule 34, a party to a litigation must produce any responsive electronic documents that are stored on devices under its control. And therein lies the problem, because the word control is, of course, quite a broad term, and an organization can be found to control devices in that sense that they do not physically own or possess, including an employee's personal device used to transmit or store company data and social media. Now, there are technologies that will allow for better control of corporate data on an employee's personal device, and since organizations are using more and more social media, such as Twitter and Facebook, to interact with their customers, there's also technology that can audit and preserve that type of ESI. However, there is no single technology magic silver bullet that captures everything. Therefore, it's really important that you, within your organization, develop policies that can be created, transmitted, and understood widely within your organization to ensure that spoliation and other risk is limited. When considering a bring your own device policy, companies really should consider the type and volume of data that's going to be transmitted through the device that they're going to be supporting. A competent plan for litigation should be put in place, and employees should be made aware of the potential for a litigation hold or a collection procedure should their devices become subject to an e-discovery request. When you're creating a policy, just make sure that the following points are included. First, clarity. Clarity is key. Organizations must have sustainable, auditable, and consistent messaging around social media's content and reputational risk implication. Secondly, they should be able to verify that the policy has been received and understood. And thirdly, organization really needs to set boundaries on the reasonable expectation of privacy or privacy. Those things should be made clear right from the get-go to the employees. And finally, policies without the ability to enforce a policy really only creates more liability. So it's important that your company is in a position to enforce whatever policy that it puts out there. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed the review of our 4 most common wastes of things in e-discovery. What I'd like to do for the last minute or two is just look at some of the risks and benefits of managed services with regards to early case assessment and document review. Now, I do want to clarify that this slide talks specifically to managed services run in the cloud, not necessarily e-discover of data in the cloud. I mean, that's another topic in itself. So I inserted this today because many vendors tout managed services as the fix for many of the topics of waste that we've already discussed. Now, in this world of increasing complexity and shrinking IT and compliance budgets, the use of an off-site managed service or cloud-based service is certainly compelling. It's alluring. If your organization is investigating the use of such an MSP or managed service provider, then this matrix of risk versus benefits may be useful. For example, the risks of including an outside third party include making the process more complex. More complexity quite often leads to risk and difficulty in controlling of costs, of course. Data security, if you're in a regulated industry, any organization that needs to take your data off-site and host it somewhere else may provide data security risks. And not just data security, but also data and regulatory compliance risks. Certain countries, of course, have certain laws on data use, and certainly when it comes to personal data use, that simply have to be adhered to. And, of course, that is a minefield in itself. So you just want to make sure if you're going to use a managed service provider, you need to know how the data is being secured and where. Next, the control of costs and wastage, something we've already mentioned. Don't outsource to the MSP thinking that they've got your best interests at heart. Your priorities are not necessarily aligned with theirs. And once something is outside of your immediate control, you may find it's harder to actually control costs and wastage. The next point is, of course, if you pay someone else to do the job, your own internal people are going to lose some of the technical expertise that could have been very valuable in an e-discovery case. Now, that isn't always a bad thing, in as much as some people prefer an independent contractor status when it comes to employment. There's obviously far less to do for someone who's an independent contractor than there is for someone who's a full-time employee in employment laws and so on and so forth. So that risk could also be a benefit, but it's certainly the case that a brain drain could occur, which would potentially mean that your managed service provider is becoming a bit more sticky, and you're losing some of the opportunity that you could have had for people internally to skill up. Then there's managing of service level agreements and making sure that companies are held accountable to those, and also the control of the process. Is your responsiveness to a deposition going to be affected by a third party or reliance upon a third party to actually produce the SI that you need? But there's also benefits. The technology that we've already mentioned to sustain a fully competent and scalable EDRM environment isn't cheap. Not only is it not cheap, it also needs to be backed up. It needs to be highly available. When you need it, you must get it. You've got to have the thoughts of maintenance and support. So these are things which typically managed service providers are able to eliminate from the equation because it's their problem, not necessarily yours. It says scalable infrastructure. That should say scalable, sorry, on that slide. This is the other thing, of course. With many of the cloud services now, we appreciate that the provision of cloud services are done in such a way that they're very much integrated in a very, very large grid system. It's not the case anymore that an application is run in the cloud, but rather whole services that are interlinked. A huge infrastructure is put in place with cloud services, and of course these do tend to be far more scalable than what companies can do on premise. Then another benefit is availability on an as-needed basis. Perhaps you have a contract with a company that you can turn on when you have pending litigation and turn off when you don't. We've already mentioned independent contractors, SLAs, 24/7 hours a day, and of course the ability to access e-discovery experts. I should just say regarding 24/7, another benefit, of course, is the ability to work around the clock on legal when legal deadlines are tight, which obviously for many organizations is not always possible or practical with the resources that they have internally, but is often a lot more easier to do externally. Now, finally, I would just say, this is my last slide, you'll be pleased to know, I think I've been fairly unbiased and neutral until this point, but now I'm going to throw that all out the window in order to promote a service that my company, Bluesource, delivers. It's a shameless plug, but I'm going to try and be subliminally quick about it all, and then we can go into the questions and answers. A rundown. Bluesource, we are biased. We're proponents of semantic solutions, including Enterprise Vault as one of the world's leading archive platforms, and Clearwell as one of the world's leading e-discovery platforms. We offer a managed Clearwell and Discovery Assist service, which is pretty unique. Unlike traditional managed services, Bluesource does not own the Clearwell platform, nor do we move your sensitive data off-site. Rather, we assist companies with deploying Clearwell to tune it to the specific needs of the business, and then our experts can scope, implement, support, and manage everything behind your firewall. We'll work with you and your your teams to optimize the EDRM workflow, and we do it with this service for which there's the three components which you can see on the slide in front of you. Discovery Assist is a new end-user support service for litigation support teams, attorneys, and paralegals. It's based upon Clearwell e-discovery platform. Discovery Assist is offered with our new Platinum level managed service for Clearwell, which provides a 99.9% uptime guarantee and provides application management, proactive monitoring and reporting, and remote 24/7 technical support. as we proactively manage the health of your Clearwell infrastructure. There you go. That's my little commercial break over. Hopefully you've enjoyed our presentation this afternoon, and now I'd like to return the call over to Joe, our moderator, to invite your questions.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Again, that was Matthew Edwards, President and CEO of Bluesource. Just a note here, if you do want a copy of the slides just presented, you can download those using the drop-down menu that's on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. We have about 10 minutes, so I encourage you for our question and answer portion of our webcast. So I encourage you to get those questions in. Matthew, I wanted to start off with one of my own. We hear a lot about, and I know you touched on this, but maybe you could speak more at length. I hear all the time that if you don't have a plan in place ahead of time, that when you do have a litigation event that requires an e-discovery effort, you're going to be behind the eight ball. Is that true, and what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, having been on the receiving end of litigation as well as assisting with litigation, I can promise you that nothing is more helpful than some soundness of mind, and having a plan put together when you're not under pressure, you're not stressed out, and you don't have blood leaking into the sea of e-discovery that the sharks are circling is obviously very, very important. I think too many...
Sorry, I don't mean
Sorry,
to
go ahead.
You. Can you talk a little bit about what that plan might look like? I know it's hard for me to kind of think about if there's not a litigation event and I don't know what the e-discovery project might be. How do I put a plan in place? So what does it look like? Does it talk about who's on the team, how it comes together?
Yeah, right. In its very simplest form, what you want to do is start with a plan of mind. Find out who is in any e-discovery case going to be your key stakeholders in the e-discovery. It's not always just inside counsel. It's not always the IT department. So the first part of the plan is to actually track who within the organization is going to be needed in order to be responsive. The second thing really is to look at what. What is it that we will need to maybe potentially put on legal hold? What is it that we have in front of us in terms of technologies today that may have increased, may have come into the organization only recently, that perhaps weren't on our radar a couple of years ago when we went through this process last time. Figure out what it is that you have out there, what systems are available, to what degree are they going to allow us to put potentially responsive data under legal hold. How is the next question, and that should be addressed in the plan. How, when we get an e-discovery request, are we going to communicate? How are we going to make sure that we do things in a way that's repeatable? We don't want to repeat the same mistakes, for sure. And by having a repeatable process in terms of the approach, and it could be loosely based upon EDRM model, but how is a question that your plan has got to address. The next question, and it sounds like I'm sounding like the five W's and a H, but when? So when an e-discovery deposition comes in, what and when are the crucial dates for having things completed? Putting a framework like that together in a plan is not going to, it's not going to bail you out of every situation, but it just allows, the framework just allows some rational thought to be put into an e-discovery process ahead of there actually being a firestorm to actually bail yourself out. So those are the main things, figuring out who needs to be a part of it, what it is that needs to be protected, how it is that you're going to be able to place legal hold on it, and when. What is the timeline moving into maybe the meet and confer process with the opposing counsel.
We have a question here on the cloud. Using managed services delivered in the cloud makes my security team nervous. How do you choose a cloud solution with security in mind? A very good question. I think that's probably on a lot of our minds here.
Yeah. So clearly, this is a reputation question. The security aspect, we think of the old adage, no one got fired by buying IBM, and sometimes conservative is a good approach, right? But certainly the reputation of the vendor has to be key to the decision. If you are using a relatively small vendor, then what is their reputation in the marketplace? What have their peers said? Do they have a good good references that you can actually go and talk to without discriminating the decision as part of your procurement process? There are a number of vendors like Symantec, like EMC, who provide services and put their names on them. And of course, when you're talking about large organizations like that, then you have a certain amount of sense of security that when it comes to following certain regulations regarding data storage, like HIPAA laws for the health industry, or like PCI compliance, you can be assured that in many of the cases that those larger organizations will have already jumped through all those hoops way ahead of offering you their services. But certainly it really helps to shop around, but to look very carefully at the reputation of the companies. And also ask yourself some questions, like if this company was to go pop, where would I be if it happened in the middle of one of my cases? Is that company likely to go bankrupt? Is that company itself under any kind of litigation itself that may have an impact on what I'm trying to do?
Matthew, I wanted to move on here. We have just a few minutes left, and I want to get to a few more questions. I also want to let our audience know that Matthew has graciously agreed to answer any questions that we don't get to by email. So just because we're running out of time here, it shouldn't stop you from getting those questions in. We will try to get all of those answered. I really like this question. I always thought about e-discovery as sunk costs that I couldn't do much to impact. Your presentation has changed my thinking a little. We like to hear that, of course. And we promise this is not a planning question. What would you recommend as my first step toward implementing new processes? Where are we starting here? What's the starting point? And let's try to go brief here, and we'll try to get through a couple more questions.
Okay, I'll be very brief. The starting point is download the slide deck after the presentation. Have a meeting of minds internally as quickly as possible, and just try to put together a plan. That whole plan to reduce costs and increase efficiency in the discovery. Some of the things that we've looked at today just look very straightforward, and perhaps they look obvious. Of course, if we collect too much data or preserve too much data, or of course, if we never delete data from our system, it's going to create a bigger challenge down the line. But the difficulty is then how do you convince an organization of other people who have different and varied interests in that data, not just its e-discovery value? How do you then make sure that everyone's on the page? And that really means getting a plan together, getting the relevant stakeholders together, finding someone in the business at very high level, ideally board level, who will sponsor the plan from an executive level, and then go through and start benchmarking the gaps in your organization. My list wasn't a complete list by any means, and certainly there are other things out there that you'd want to consider as part of your own evaluation.
I wanted to talk a little bit about, you mentioned a reasonable and defensible data deletion policy. And it sounds like you've stressed this, and I certainly believe it's true that data management and e-discovery, of course, go hand in hand. Any rules of thumb out there? We hear that term a lot, reasonable and defensible, and I know it's a little bit hard to define. Any rules of thumb about a matter of years before I can delete something? Should I be tagging data with some hierarchy of importance? How does this work?
Yeah, so it's a good question.
First of all, I'm guessing there's no hard and fast rules.
No, and well, there are for certain regulated industries. There are certain rules that they have to actually comply to. I mean, we've done work, for example, before with architects, and I'll use architects as an example because many people perhaps don't think of architecture being a regulated industry. But certainly when it comes to keeping design documents for buildings, for example, or bridges or civil structures, those things have to be kept for a considerable period of time, perhaps as long as 20 or 30 years sometimes, because what might happen further along down the line if a defect is found within the building, there might be an ongoing litigation regarding it. However, if you are in an industry that doesn't have such clear guidelines as to how long to keep and preserve data, then you've really got to take advice from inside counsel and weigh that against the cost and burden of keeping it and producing it further down the line. Certainly, if you're in a regulated industry that like HIPAA or PCI, the rules are that data really should be destroyed as soon as it's no longer necessary to keep it, because that's personal information. So these things govern the inputs as to how long and what. But to answer your other question, categorization is hugely important. If you can, at the time of ESI's creation, categorize it as to what type of information is contained, the metadata that is contained in it, that goes a long way when it comes to the other end, which is to then try to sift, sort, and analyze what needs to be deleted from what is destructible.
Well, unfortunately, I think we're just about out of time. This is such a good topic. There's so much to talk about. We didn't even get to social media, email. Hopefully we can have you back, and we'll talk about some of these other things. But I really want to thank you for just a very informative session here. I think we all learned a ton. Again, everyone, our speaker was Matthew Edwards. He is President and CEO of Bluesource. And also a special thanks to Bluesource for making this webcast possible. The webcast has been recorded, and it will be available sometime in the next day or two on our website. CPE credit is available for our archive webcasts. I believe you need to be a subscriber for Compliance Week. You can find our on-demand CPE library on our website, complianceweek.com. Once again, to obtain your CPE credit, I'll be finishing this wrap-up in a second. At that point, the webcast will close automatically. The final exam will be presented in a separate window. If you have any trouble viewing that test or getting your certificate, just send us an email at info@complianceweek.com. This concludes our webcast. I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. Thank you.